everyone, and welcome to Trendholm Talks. I'm here with Hanne Herland. Welcome, Hanne, on the show. You are a Norwegian historian and best-selling author, and you're also the founder of the Herland Report. And then you're one of my good friends. Here in Scandinavia, we are very close to each other. Denmark and Norway is neighbor countries, and often you have invited me to your show, but today you come on my show, and I'm really grateful for you that you will take the time to come on this show. Hanne, before we start talking about your new book that has just been released, which is called The New Left Tyranny, I want to hear how life is in Norway with the lockdown and the reopening. How are you doing?
Well, Norway is quite, in a sense, a remote country. It's all the way up close to the North Pole. And we are not on the continent in Europe. We're very far away from the United States, where the battle for our civilization is really currently undergoing. So in Norway and Scandinavia as a whole, I do believe many people are not quite aware what is going on in the world outside of our little bubble. But of course, with the corona situation and many things that are ongoing now, there's an awakening among the people, and especially also with the past years of internet access, so that we are not only any longer dependent on the mainstream media for as our news outlets. Things are beginning to open up, but things are quiet here.
Well, I should say that the Herland Report is the name of your channel. I just mentioned it, but I want to say that the Herland Report is a Scandinavian news site and a TV channel on YouTube and podcast, which is reaching millions yearly. And the Herland Report is a great place to watch interviews and read the work of leading intellectuals and thought leaders and authors and activists from across the political spectrum and free from political correctness. That's your trademark, Hanne. That is, you're so free of political correctness, and I thank you for that. So we have had many good conversations in the past, and I really encourage people to go here on YouTube to find the Herland Report, because there are many excellent interviews with a lot of people from across the world. But now, Hanne, you are out with a new book called The Left Tyranny, The New Left Tyranny. And I'm wondering, because in this book you claim that the Western culture, the traditional Western values has been subverted by this leftist neo-Marxist ideology. Actually, it has attacked the Western culture. So could you, for a start, give us a brief account on how we came to this point of destruction and how it plays into our society today?
It's very interesting, I find, to see the driving forces behind the developments in the Western culture the past 50, 60, 70, maybe even more to the past, from the 1900s and onward. We have seen the rise of the opposition against traditional historical values, precisely the values that made the West such a successful culture and civilization. And with the rise of modernism in the early 1900s, there also came the rise of a strong atheism and an opposition against many of the conservative values in the West, such as the family, the strength of the church, the cultural heritage. Post-World War II, we saw how the British Empire slowly eroded. And in the aftermath of World War II is where we find the seeds to what later became the student revolutions in the 1960s, namely the Frankfurter School, of intellectuals coming out of Germany post-World War II, and they call themselves the neo-Marxists because they saw how Marxism or how socialism didn't work that well during the reign of Hitler and during the Nazi times in Germany. So they modified their ideologies post-World War II, changing the name from clearly Marxist, socialist Marxism, to neo-Marxist structure. Many people tend to forget that during the war, the authoritarian system that was in Germany was a national socialist system. Post-World War II, it was Theodor Adorno. Professor Adorno was one of the leaders of the neo-Marxist movement that ended in the hippie movement in the 60s. And they later took control, as we know, of the leading institutions in the West. And many of them today are the professors, are the sociologists, are the leaders in the mainstream media. They come from that precise, let's say, ideological background. And Professor Adorno in the 1950s onward redefined National Socialism into the West and explained it as a right-wing extremist phenomenon. So the whole concept of National Socialism being socialists was slowly eroded from the memory of Westerners. And to this point today, whenever we speak about Germany during the war and the ideology, the Nazi ideology, we always say that it was right-wing extremism. So you see, this is one of the issues that I address in the new book, New Left Tyranny, because I look at the roots and the authoritarian roots of the type of thinking and left-wing ideology that today permeates much of the Western elites.
Are you saying that we are actually living in a society that is Marxist?
One has to distinguish, which I do in the book too, between Karl Marx, the teachings of Karl Marx. He produced his very famous book on communism in 1840, and out of that ideology or out of his thinking came a variety of groups. You had the clear Marxist, you had the socialist, you had the communists, the socialists believing that a strong state should control everything in a nation. You also have the version of it that we do have in Scandinavia and you have in Denmark, which is the democratic socialism, which also implies that the state should have strong control over society, but that there also should be a clearly democratic a part of society so that the people should vote and all of that. But we have the different views. For example, Karl Marx was very clear that he did not want the abolition of the family. He looked at the family as a very important structure in society. But when we come to the neo-Marxists, the ones that control the 1960s and 70s and 80s and hates the church, hates the traditional European values, retells history in such a way that it sounds like the only thing that Europe ever did good was evil against all kinds of other nations. I mean, the self-hatred, these kinds of values that we see coming with the new left or with the neo-Marxist new left actually is even much more radical than Karl Marx was.
So are those the same people who are pushing for political correctness today? So we see that kind of trend in our society. There is so much political correctness. Are this coming from those neo-Marxists?
Well, the thing is, and this is also why my new book focuses on explaining the development, the historical development towards the kind of situation we do have today, where we see that the totalitarian or authoritarian elements within the left rise up to such a level that it shocks many in the West, and many speak about that democracy, the era of democracy, might be coming to an end in the West due to this. When you look to the roots of the new neo-Marxist new left movement, you end up in World War II and in some of the ideology that also characterized that period. And one of the issues we saw during the World War II in Germany was a very strong control over the press. The media under Goebbels was very controlled. And post-World War II, you have, for example, the father of the 1960s student revolution in the United States. His name is Herbert Marcuse. He openly stated he was a neo-Marxist. And he spoke about, in one of his books, the need to repress the majority views, the need to repress and discriminate against those views that the left-wing radicals did not like. So you see a clear tendency towards an authoritarian repression of free speech. Already in the 1960s, and this is what we see more in a full-blown version, for example, in America today.
But I'm just wondering why neo-Marxists have been so successful. Because if Westerners were really deeply rooted in their own values and their own tradition, I'm not sure they would have been so successful. More people would have opposed this new political ideology. So this is a phenomenon happening within the West. It's not, foreigners coming against us. It's actually within our own circles. So isn't this a symptom that we already lost the values a long time ago? Otherwise, neo-Marxism could not have been so successful.
I do agree with you, Eben, on that point. And I think that even going back, which I also do in the book, to the French Revolution, the French Revolution is a marking point as well in Western development. Many have discussed where do we find the first seeds in our civilization that marks the decline or that marks the changing in the value system. And this is important when you look, for example, back to the old Roman culture as well. They had it was the rise and the fall of the Roman Empire. And the beginning, what marks the beginning of the fall is the changing of the values in the Roman system. And I think as well in Europe, it's been happening over quite some time, which you're stating.
Yeah, because I think the only reason why neo-Marxists have been so successful, and also Marxism in the first place was so successful, was because atheism was introduced before that. In the 1800s, we had Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher. We had Karl Marx and also Freud. And they all of them introduced atheism. And I think atheism is the root of all this, because what they basically want to establish is, heaven on earth through a kind of reordering of the political structure. And they want to build this kind of existential utopia, which we have seen is not really possible, through social justice. And to do that, you need to eliminate the belief in God. So I think that atheism is at the root of this problem. I don't know if you agree, but this is my understanding of it.
Well, when we look at Karl Marx, for example, in the 1840s and onward, he went, by the way, from country to country and was expelled from country to country and ended up living in London without citizenship. And I mean, you know, his thoughts at the time were very, very radical. And he said that religion is the opium of the people. So it's true that during the 1800s, you had among the elites in Europe, Karl Marx was among the elites. He was among the intellectual elites at the time that wrote about how the bourgeoisie or the leadership among the European nations at that time should be changed with a new leadership, which was the Marxist elite. So that's what many times we, when we speak about Karl Marx, we speak about the need for the working class to rise, because we say he defended the weak and the poor. But when you actually look closely and read Karl Marx, which I have done for a long time, you see that what he is arguing is the changing of one elite with a new atheist elite, a new Marxist elite, and with the strengthening of the state. That would imply that the Marxists or the communists or the socialists would control all income in a nation, both what we would call private income, but also public income. So that means you control the taxpayers' money. And in order to implement this kind of socialist system, you have to infuse into the public the belief that they are being freed when they actually are being enslaved, that they don't need individual freedom, that they don't need free speech, and that the historical capitalist system, which freed millions and had millions rise from poverty when it first was implemented into our structure around 200 years ago, it caused the rise of the lower classes. And in order to stop that and to make sure that all the power remains with the top socialist elite, you have to quench the freedoms that you initially saw in the historical capitalism, which is, of course, very different from the robbery or crony capitalism that we have today.
But it means that people now have to put their beliefs into the state and not the church and God. And I think this makes a very huge difference, that the state is now taking control of everything. And that's something I've really been thinking about during this corona crisis, because here in Denmark, we are a social democratic country. And I've seen now how the state has been able to gain even more power, like saying to the people, if you don't do what we say, you're going to die from this virus. So you better obey the rules. And I've seen that a lot of people actually was very quick to adjust and say, yeah, we have to do everything that the state tells us. And I also see how the churches has been closed. And, you know, 2 weeks ago, I was for Sunday Mass because now churches has been opened again. And when the priest instituted the Eucharist, the Holy Eucharist, he was wearing rubber gloves. And, you know, I was really thinking now the state is sneaking into the Mass and is controlling how we celebrate Mass, how we worship God. We were not allowed to sing because our breath could be contagious, you know, things like that. So now the state is regulating even how we worship God. And of course, a lot of people would say, well, but that's for health reasons right now, so that's completely okay. I'm not so sure about that. I still think that, of course, a church should take precautions and not be a source of that where people can contract the virus. But I still believe that there has to be places within society that is sacred, where the state has no access, for instance, liturgies and the worship of God. And for that reason, I think that the coronavirus is really touching upon the relationship between state and church. And I just see now that the power of the state is growing everywhere. And I don't see that as a good sign, to be honest with you, even though we are being told that it's for our own safety, it's for our own, well-being, that the state needs so much control over us. I think it's a very dangerous road to let the state even decide how we can worship God.
Well, it is, I would argue, the implementation of clearly a Marxist, almost communist system. In Norway, we see how every Friday the prime minister, and we have a woman government here, so it's almost only women in the government. So these women are there and they're telling the population what they are allowed to do this week and who they are allowed to talk to or not talk to. And this mimics the Soviet system that we saw before, and also the Chinese system, you may argue today, where you have a Politburo, to put it that way, that decides what kind of glasses the whole nation is allowed to produce, what kind of spoons we are allowed to produce in the factories, and you have the Politburo or the communist leaders. So it's strange for us in Norway because we have a so-called conservative government that is implementing a communist system in which the state rulers are going very carefully into almost every element of personal life to control it. I do think that initially when this virus first made its appearance in China and we had all of that, we have the meeting. There's at a certain point, I do believe, the situation became politicized and used by political groups that wanted to incite this kind of authoritarianism. Because we saw in the middle of February, there were reports from the WHO saying that China was controlling the situation very well. Then suddenly around February 20th, Bill Gates started writing and being very active in the media, demanding complete economic shutdowns. He said this could be the pandemic of the century. It could kill millions of people in the United States, for example. They operated with a percentage. The WHO around March 10th told on March 10th, told European leaders in an EU meeting in which also both the Danish and the Norwegian prime minister 2 days later had implemented total shutdown. In this meeting, the WHO leader, Dr. Tedros, who, by the way, is a Marxist-Leninist, and by the way, was supported by China for the position of the leadership of the WHO. He's not a medical doctor, so it was controversial. And when he's from Ethiopia, and when he was a foreign minister in Ethiopia, China donated millions to that nation. So there's a strong tie between China and the interests of China and Dr. Tedros. And Dr. Tedros in this meeting, March 10th, said that more than 3.5% of those who contracted the virus might die in Europe. And that would mean for Germany millions. It would mean for Norway approximately 150,000. And it was reported from that meeting with the EU leaders on March 10th that Angela Merkel was so afraid and got so scared that, other leaders had to calm her down. 2 days later, a lockdown, a total economic lockdown, a total stopping of the economic system in Europe and in the EU was implemented, and also in Norway. And the Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg, she admitted just a few days ago, we've been writing about it on the Herland Report since day one, demanding the resignation of the Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg unless she lifted the lockdowns. So we've been saying that from the very first moment, saying that it was done out of fear. And who did they listen to? Did they listen to national pandemic experts such as Folkehelseinstituttet in Norway, who clearly all along said, do not close down schools, do not shut down the economy, but protect the vulnerable groups? No, they did not listen to them. They only listened to the globalists' systems, the Bill Gates and the WHO, and WHO also receives fundings by billions from Bill Gates yearly. So I think the politicization of the situation here is what really lay at the heart of the problem. And just to finish off by mentioning that, please remember that over 80,000 people died from regular flus in the United States in 2000, and I think it was 17, as reported by CNN. And the WHO states that around 650,000 die annually from regular flus in the world. And this year we've seen how the coronavirus so far has not taken that amount of lives at all. So clearly it's been politicized.
Yeah, it's getting more and more obvious that this pandemic or this corona crisis has been a perfect tool for globalists and neo-Marxists to gain more power. I think it's getting more and more obvious that this is what's going on. They have seen this as a completely perfect way to grab even more power. But where does that leave us? I mean, here in Denmark, 70% of all Danes, they support our prime minister, who is really very controlled, and you know, we have this controlled reopening. So I don't know, you know, she used to say a couple of weeks ago that we're not going back to normal anytime soon, or maybe never. So it sounds like they are dreaming about implementing a new political system where everything is going to be controlled, more surveillance, and they decide how many people can come together, how many people can gather, you know, all these rules we have been living with for several weeks. So maybe we're going to have that kind of new society ahead of us. I don't know, I don't hope so. But what do you think are the opportunities to protest against this? Because, like I said, here in Denmark, a lot of people actually do agree with the Prime Minister. There may be 20% or 30% that doesn't. But if the majority do not obstruct this new political order, this new social order, are we, you know, can we expect Scandinavia and Europe to be a kind of new Soviet Union?
Well, we already are in many ways. I mean, for example, the mainstream media has been so controlled for so many years, which is reflected in, like you're saying, 70% of the Danish population, you know, are just believe in whatever they read in the paper. So in a sense, we already are a Marxist society in many ways. And remember, too, that in these kind of socialist system, again, going back to World War II and Germany, the capitalist owners in Germany went hand in hand with the National Socialist system. And as we've seen with the EU, which one may label a regional socialism. It was not a national socialist system that obviously didn't end up working in Germany. Right after World War II, the EU was established, or the coal union back in the day was established as, one may say, a regional socialism. So we've been under a socialist system and a very strong state. Look at France. For many, many years. To me, it's an irony that it is precisely under women leaders that we have these perfect, fearful ladies that end up implementing precisely the kind of communist structure that gives all power to the state. And this is why it is peculiar to see the Norwegian Prime Minister also admitting that fear was the force that led her in those early days in March as she implemented the lockdown. The lockdown in Norway, it is estimated, will cost us between 1,000 to 2,000 billion. So it's clearly that we're using and spending the pension money for the next generation here too.
But do you think it's because they are feminists that they can do this, and they're having this ideology, or what is the reason why it is the women who is implementing this system?
When you look at, I think, to be honest, that the Western leadership has been weakened for many years precisely by the new left tyranny, as I'm writing about in this book, which is available on Amazon and in 60 countries worldwide. I would like to point that out to your readers, and please follow us at the Herland Report, both the website, the news site, and also the YouTube channel, where we have many lovely programs with Ibn Tranholm as well. I do believe that, or to put it that way, I do not believe that the world will become a much better place once women rule the world.
Why
this
not?
Is one of the ideologies coming out of the 1960s neo-Marxist feminism that in many ways attacked the man and has created an animosity between the sexes and has caused the current trends or has contributed to the cause of the current trends for massive divorce rates in the West. When you look to the East, when you look to Russia, you look to China, you look to other cultures that have not been subjected to this kind of weakening of the woman as well, you see they have also handled the coronavirus in a complete other way. When you look to China in the East and also in Russia, it's been handled not at all in the same kind of feeling of frenzy as we have seen in Northern Europe and in Europe.
Yeah, but why would women want a new totalitarian system in their countries? Why would women or the female leaders, you're right, they are very, very hard and they have a very hard line, but why women? Women should be more caring, more loving, you know. Why are the women now perhaps even harder than the men used to be?
I think that when you look to leadership, you do not find a good leader acting in fear when things happen. So I think somehow this kind of femininization of society, feelings of victimization, and some of these elements have not helped us become better leaders. I would argue that for the military, we need strong men. I would argue that maybe precisely this experience of how female leadership completely failed us in Europe when we needed rational, sound thinking leaders. We instead had a bunch of women who were fearful and reacted in fear. And we are now currently facing in Europe as well the worst financial crisis in a century. And much of this stems from our leaders handling the situation out of fear instead of having a rational mind. So that's just a question for me. And my other question is, will we see similar riots in a 6 months' time in Europe as we now see in the United States?
But Hanne,
I think our enemies, our cultural enemies as well, are spilling into this picture as well with a desire to destroy the West. So it's a question now on how to rise up and sober up and be rational facing the calamities ahead.
So let's conclude by talking about solutions. What is the solution to this, to the spreading of the neo-Marxist ideology? And, you know, combined with this corona crisis, it could really, you know, gain even more power. What can we do to stop it?
We can follow very closely and support what is happening in the United States, because the United States is the epicenter of the fight between those who want to continue the globalist transnational business model system that today goes hand in hand with the socialists to create an even stronger state. That system versus the system that fights for a more push for national sovereignty, jobs back to America, the strengthening of the working class in America. And this is the perspective that we've seen Donald Trump push for in the United States. Of course, in Europeans' eyes, Donald Trump seems completely crazy. And this is because the media, over 90% of the mainstream media in the United States and in the media also in Europe mimics that. These are owned by the globalist billionaires that own the transnational system today. And they don't want to pay taxes to any nation. The big Starbucks, the big Amazons, they want to float across borders. They fight for the open border society, because an open border society with the weak people and a weak democratic system in which the billionaires own the media and can control the people through the media. This is precisely the system that they would want to further in order to maximize even more both economic gains and in question of power over the world. Pertaining to that system, it is international. So for example, Putin also has that issue with the oligarchs in Russia. And of course, many in China would like that system to continue because they also benefit from it. So I would say the United States is the epicenter of where we now see the fight between the forces on who will determine the future the political system and economic system in the West.
But I think it's very important, if you want to join that fight, to have some beliefs that are not connected to the state. You need to have some values, you need to have some beliefs and something higher than the state. And I think, unfortunately, in modernism, it's very hard for many people to find that kind of belief that is supernatural or is not linked somehow to politics. So for me, I think that is important. Like I said before, neo-Marxism or Marxism in general was only possible because of atheism. You need to be grounded in something that is not related to the state. And I think for many people in these modern times, that is the problem, that they don't have faith in anything else than politics.
And you may say that this is, of course, the revolt in the United States as well. Because they ask, what happened to our constitutional rights? What happened to the belief in the values that created the United States? And those were Christian believing values and Jewish values. And those values are some of the values that also Donald Trump attempts to follow up on. So I think that the rise of strength, or the rise, or you may say the rising awareness among the people in general, that they are being played through the control of the media, that has been possible through also the freedom of the internet. And as we've seen, the increasing censorship or attempted censorships of Google and Facebook and so on, you see again the new left desiring to quench that sense of freedom. But Brexit itself, and the election of Donald Trump, for example, still demonstrates that the people do have a strong say. So this again is why I think that, and this is what I argue in my book, New Left Tyranny, as well, that we need to return to some of the strength, the cultural strength, the historical strength, the morality that we had in the historical pool. For example, the capitalist model was based on trust. Today we see the very opposite. So we need both the Protestant ethic pertaining to the old capitalist system, how it rose in pair with the Protestant ethic, and we need a strengthened cultural focus on the religious values that used to hold us together and that used to create a sense of empathy among us and a stronger sense of solidarity than what we see today. So empathy is key.
Thank you so much, Hanne Herland, for your very interesting thoughts on all this, and thanks for sharing it with us. I want to conclude with quoting the Bible, fear not, only have faith. And I think this is something that is very useful for our situation right now, that we should not focus on fear, but on faith. So thank you so much, Hanne, and I hope you're going to post a lot of articles on Herland Report in the future and make more interviews, and I strongly encourage my viewers to go and check on Hanne's website, Herland Report. You can find it on YouTube or on the internet. Thank you so much for watching.